So in last week's video, we talked about what is a dungeon. In this week's video, what is a town? So we talk about the various aspects in a role-playing game. What is the function of a town in your story?
If you're looking for adventure, grab the modules each month to support the channel and play the campaign with your gaming group. You're sure to get hooked on adventure.
So I'd like to take this moment to thank our sponsors, which is you, the person who purchases our role-playing game system neutral modules and tools on our website, questgivers.com. That's what helps make this channel a reality. We did just recently fund a Kickstarter, and there's a new Kickstarter on September 1st. Pre-orders for the books and that sort of thing will be coming up soon. So on with towns. What are towns? Now essentially you can think of a town in the same way that you actually think of a dungeon. It's just above ground. So the corridors are streets and the rooms are buildings. And essentially you're doing the same sort of thing where you're sequestering the party in a place where there's a barrier to the outside world. So surrounding the town is wilderness. So whether you're playing a fantasy medieval game or you're playing a futuristic science fiction game, there's always something surrounding the town that is considered other than the town. So this we would just generally refer to as the wilderness. So for instance, if this was science fiction, you'd be on a spaceport and space would be the wilderness around it. So you'd have to traverse this wilderness to go somewhere else. Like dungeons, towns are self-contained by the surrounding wilderness. But there is a fundamental difference between a dungeon and a town, and that essentially is resources. So you can get things in the dungeon, so you're able to pick up stuff and you're able to sort of kill monsters and take their stuff. But if you want to acquire something specific, you can't go to a shop in the dungeon. That's when a town comes into it. Towns have specific resources that you don't find in the dungeon. So typically things are created in the town that are useful in the dungeon, or it's things that, like food and lodging and whatever, that's not available in the dungeon. So goods and services that you wouldn't find in the dungeon, you typically find in the town. So towns will have things like merchants and that sort of. Now, obviously, some people are going to say, yes, you can have merchants in the dungeon. When you're doing a mega dungeon or something like that, you can actually have societies within the dungeon itself, and these things will actually be in the dungeon. All a mega dungeon is a collection of underground towns and dungeons lumped together into one giant resource. But what we're really talking about here are the smaller dungeons. So what we talked about in the last video, where you're using smaller dungeons as your one-shot or single session or a couple of session games using a smaller dungeon. When you start to do mega dungeons, then the concept of the town is actually built into the mega dungeon in some cases. In other cases, you've got to go down, go back up, go down, go back up. Like in a Diablo sense. In the original Diablo game, you had to go down the dungeon, go back up to town to buy your stuff, go back down the dungeon, etc. That is the classic dungeon and town dichotomy. But in some mega dungeons these days, you can't really exit the dungeon, so you have towns within the dungeon itself. But the key concept of a town is that usually the town is where the social aspect of the game begins to occur. This is where the characters are interacting with NPCs, they're interacting with narratively significant individuals like mentors and heralds and things like that. The other characters that are like the bad guy, etc., they tend to be in the dungeon. It doesn't have to be this way. You can obviously chop and change. We're just talking about this so that you can understand structurally what's actually happening in the game and what's happening in the story. Now, there's two ways you can approach a town. You can make a town interesting, or you can make it uninteresting. By making a town interesting, the players want to stay in the town. So they want their characters to remain in town because the town is interesting. So this is where the town tends to act like a dungeon. So there's all kinds of political stuff happening. There's things that they can get. There's adventures they can go on within the town. If you make the town uninteresting, they want to leave the town. So in other words, you're making them go somewhere. They don't want to be in town for very long. They just want to go there, get what they want, and go back to what they were doing. So an uninteresting town leads the players and the characters to want to leave, and an interesting town means they want to stay. Now, a town should have a well-defined personality. The town is essentially an NPC in your game, so it acts like a character. Same as a dungeon, it has all kinds of traits. It has a personality to it based on the NPCs and monsters that you find in it. These things lend it towards a personality that the players remember through these quirks. So the name of the town is not as important as what actually happens in the town. How do the populace react to things? What kind of characters are they going to find there? What's the political situation? What's the economic situation? All these factors are extremely important to giving flavor to the actual environment. So one way that people can explore a town, it may even just be a one-horse town. There's only like 3 or 4 buildings there, but you can have a lot of personality in the characters. So their exploration of the town is more a social exploration. Obviously, with the social component of role-playing, this is where you can have interesting characters that lead the party on adventures. The character and personalities of the NPCs are affected by the mood of the actual town. So the mood of the town is what gives that sort of flavor to the players, to the characters, so that you get a sense of this is a real place. Now, I've had a video in the past where we talk about how to do great NPCs. This is important to have a look at that video in order to find out how you want to flavor your town. What is the overriding mood and personality of the town that then gets filtered through to all the NPCs that exist in that town. So the town is really then a base of operations that the players or the characters can use. You may reward them with property in the town, which gives them sort of a reason to hang around, or it's something that grounds them in that actual location. So they use that location as a starting point and an ending point, so they can go out and come back, go out and come back. So that's important as a base of operations. Now, most towns, you want to also think very carefully about the political and economic strata of the town. Who's in charge? Who's underneath that person? How is that power disseminated? And the economics of the town, who's poor, who's rich, who's in the middle, and who's trying to manipulate the way that this functions in the actual society. Those things are important to consider to give the town a sense of realism, to give it flavor, and to help make it memorable. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Scotty will be back with us soon. We are both going to be at Mace in North Carolina on the 8th, 9th, 10th of November. And we hope to see you there if you're local or you're traveling to that destination. There'll be a couple of Quest Givers games playing there. If you like this video, like button. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell if you want to see future videos, and support us by purchasing merchandise on questgivers.com. See you next week.